All right, our next speaker is our very own Elizabeth Christensen, who, look at that, waiting. It's almost like you've been waiting here all day for your opportunity.
Yeah. Next time, can I go sooner? No, I'm just kidding.
Uh, nope, you're stuck here all day with me. All right, you ready to go?
Sure.
All
Let me.
right, tell us about web maps from PostGIS with feature serve and tile serve.
All right. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about web maps from PostGIS with PG Feature Serve and PG Tile Serve. These are older projects that have been around for a couple of years. They've had a lot of adoption with some larger production projects. But I think that there's an opportunity for people who maybe aren't as far along with their web application stack to kind of take a step back and sort of learn some of the basics. Martin has a talk later on tile serve and H3. And I think Brian Timoney also has a talk on a bunch of feature serve stuff. He did an awesome talk last year about feature serve also. So I kind of wanted really for this talk to just kind of go through some super basics, show people how to get set up with the demo repositories. If you're kind of new to web development and you don't know that end of geospatial, that's kind of where this talk starts for you. I am Elizabeth Garrett Christensen. I work at Crunchy Data with all of these fine folks. I'm primarily a technical writer, and I do a lot of education and advocacy for Postgres itself and then for PostGIS as well. I do a lot of kind of intro stuff, open source advocacy, helping people get started. I also am on the board of the United States Postgres Association, and I'm involved in a bunch of their work as well. So we have our Postgres database. It has PostGIS in it, and we want to get it out, and we want to get it into some kind of editable, manipulatable map format, the web, right? Because if we're a GIS person, we can get our data out and we can put it in QGIS, and we know that, but that's you can't navigate around that, and people love everything in the web now. There's a lot of places and ways to build maps now with front end architecture. There's a ton of options. Mapbox is very popular, so is Leaflet. The projects, the open layers and GeoServer are supported by the same group that supports PostGIS. And then if you're kind of in big time stuff and you're building Python and Django projects and React projects, you can also kind of use some of these. So all of these kind of these sort of frameworks that are using some kind of JavaScript or something, they all kind of want one thing from the database, and that's to consume this via API. So if you were here for Michael's talk, he did a great job of kind of explaining how the API works, and there's going to be a little bit of overlap where I'll talk about the collections too. So all of these things want to consume things by API, and so what PG Feature Serve and PG Tile Serve do are expose the data as an API in a way that can be easily consumed by one of these front end maps. If you're doing a bunch of stuff in production and you're going to have lots of big data and you want to build this out, our larger clients have had really good luck using a varnish cache. My colleague Reka has a nice blog post on how to implement that if you're wanting to go that far. So just a super kind of high level introductory, you're going to be able to use Feature Serve and Tile Serve to build interactive web maps. They sort of operate as what's kind of termed now as like a microservice. So they are a separate server. They're kind of a little piece, and they're kind of micro middleware, and they're both written in Go. And you're going to be able to get spatial data from a database and then into whatever other front end that you want. And then as we've kind of all talked about a bunch today, this is OGC compliant. And so that makes it sort of work and have a lot of interoperability with all of the other geospatial tools and libraries that people are using. And then one cool thing about the feature serve and tile serve, sort of like what Michael was talking about with his API, is there's an automatic detection of the data that you have in your tables, your geometry data, to get that exposed to the API. So you don't have to do a ton of work. We'll talk more about how the projects are different. I'm going to go through just a couple little tiny demos. But at a super high level, feature serve is going to expose JSON or GeoJSON primarily for map features, right? Your points of interest, maybe your roads, things like that are actually JSON features. You can serve any of your geometry tables and any functions, and you can serve up routing as well. Tile serve is going to serve up MVT tiles. And that's going to be generally for your larger items, your less specific feature stuff and more visual stuff, things that you need to zoom in and out, things that you need a lot of performance with. And in the same way, tile serve lets you grab your tables and your functions and routing and stuff. So I'm just going to walk through a really super simple demo of how you could kind of take some data and get started with these projects. So I have a little data set here from St. Louis that has historic locations in the city, and I just grabbed that. I found it online and I just plopped it into QGIS, and then I've also connected it to my PostGIS database. So I've got a bunch of points for my historic locations. If I look at the back in the database of that, you can see this is basic, just point geometry, and then my historic names. So to start up my feature serve project, you can start at the GitHub repo. This is an open source project under the Apache 2 license. You can kind of do whatever you want with it. I'll talk more about some other special things and demos and demo code inside the repo in a minute. And so when you get into your feature serve, there's a little config file. You'll just tell it your database name, and then you'll connect it to a port, and then you can call out a base map if you have a special base map you want to use. So when you pull up feature service and you run it, this is just running in my local environment. It's running on my little port 9000. And it kind of has its own little Explorer window. These are all of the tables that I have in my database that have geometry in them. I can just click, I can look at my tables. It'll default to not very many, but I can, look at more stuff if I want. And then if you want to see the actual JSON that's being output, you can kind of do that. And this is a great way to sort of sanity check what's going to be in that JSON output later. And so inside the feature serve repo is a little open layers routing demo that I think Paul wrote, or maybe Martin wrote, I'm not sure who, but it's a super, super handy little demo. So if you're starting from scratch with feature serve and you want to kind of get bootstrapped into the project, this is the place to go. So this is using a little bit of open layers code that's an HTML file, and it's got, little pieces of JavaScript in here, right? And so I do a little bit of front-end development. I'm not a super power user. So I'm just going to show you some basic components here of kind of what's inside this little file that kind of makes some of this map work. So you've got the URL for your layer of your historic site. So I'm just literally pulling the same URL that you saw me use when I was kind of browsing around. I'm going to give it an SRID just so it matches my data. And then I have labels on each of those locations. And so I need to match up which column in my database matches to the labels. And I can also call out a base map. So this particular sample uses a Carto base map. Thank you, Carto. And then you can also call out a map center, and that will make sure that when you open it, it starts at the right place. Otherwise, you'll spend a lot of time zooming and scrolling. And then at the bottom, you'll see there's different layers. And so you can kind of specify each of these layers, and I'll show you more about that in a little bit. But that's kind of how it collects all of these different pieces from the API as individual layers. So here's a little map that I've got going. You can see I can scroll around. This is the same data that I showed you that was just that simple table of historic locations. I'm able to kind of move around in the map, do what I want, and then it's got that base map underneath. So with, a couple simple changes in a file, I've got a map that was a flat file that's now in a web. Cool. So just to kind of recap, where I started was I had that St. Louis City data. I started a feature surf service. I edited that open layers file. I added a base map. I added a center, and I added a new layer with that table data. So both of these projects come with a cool little way that you can do filtering with the URLs using something called CQL. This is an OGC standard way to put things inside the URLs. And so like you can see here when I'm using my little explorer mode that I can write a question mark and I can say, all right, limit 1,000. And so it's going to change the data based on what I put in that URL. So if I'm in, my little dbeaver window, let's say I just want to look at stuff in St. Louis. I don't want to look at anything else in Missouri because I've loaded the whole state. I can write a SQL query for that with just a select where plocal name is St. Louis. And then if I go into that URL using CQL query filter, I can put that same query inside the URL. So if you do something like this in your open layers demo file, you can make a bunch of different pieces, right? You could have a piece with St. Louis, you could have a piece with Kansas City, you could have a piece with Columbia. And so you could see how by kind of using this basic idea of altering the URLs, if you built out kind of fancier JavaScript and more advanced variable coding, you'd be able to kind of make an interactive map. So here's a quick little demo of what this looks like with 3 different cities. So here's Kansas City, it goes right there. I can go to Columbia, I can zoom in, I can do whatever I want. So cool, I didn't spend that much time and I've already got like a somewhat interactive web map that has different features, that goes different things, that does different things based on what a user is doing. Cool. All right. So I've showed you really small amounts of data, but lots of you people love huge data sets. So that's kind of where this tile serve comes in, right? So I grabbed a zoning parcel, like a shapefile from the city of St. Louis, and I've layered that, onto my little historic locations map. And this is a huge data set, right? So we don't want to send, parcel data and tons of zoomable data over HTTP in the format of JSON. That's not an efficient way to do that. And so that's kind of where you would want to do the tile serve. Tile serve works exactly the same as the feature serve project I was showing you before. It's also a GitHub repo. You install it the same exact way. You run it in a little local, I'm going to run it in a little local environment. Just like feature serve, it'll show you all of your tables. You can kind of, and then you'll have this little previewer. And so I can zoom in and you'll see as I'm zooming in that URL is changing. So It's kind of doing a bunch of work itself to kind of decide what data to display. So I can just add this same tile server to my little demo project, right? So I'm going to start a new layer, and that's my zoning layer, and I'm just going to call out that same layer. And then there's a couple little variables in here that you see that are kind of put into the end of the tile server, and those are going to facilitate all of the zooming, right? So that whatever you're at or whatever the user is at is going to get the right data from the database. So here's a little demo of what the tile serve data looks like layered onto the historic feature serve data. So this is both feature serve and tile serve in a little demo app. And you see it works just like my other app. I can zoom in, I can zoom out, I can do whatever I need to do. Okay, if you're with me so far and you want even more demos, you can also add routing to feature serve and tile serve. So the cool thing about both of these projects is that they will let you add functions, and you can use the functions as its own layer. So if you're in that little demo repo that I was talking about before, there's a little bit of code, and I'll kind of step through this, where you can kind of create little clicks, right? So a click on the web will create a little binding event, and then that will go to a node in PG routing. And so then you'll, all the routing functions know where the nodes are, and it'll find the closest point, and then it'll create a route. So Paul, I think, or I'm pretty sure it's Paul, wrote some really nice functions. So there's a little function in here that will find that nearest node if you're, starting those routes. And then there's a nice routing function that just uses like a shortest distance Dijkstra algorithm. And then you, just like I was showing you before with your feature serve, where all your tables are able to be part of the API, any function can be part of the API too. So you have a little function in here for the find route. So back in my little open layers demo, I'm just gonna put a little thing in here for my route, the route URL, and then I can just now I have a map that has all the layers. It has a tile serve layer, a feature serve layer, and a routing layer. And if I can get this to play, you can see where I click, I wait a long time because I didn't index anything, and then a route shows up. So I've got kind of the major components of a web app built here in pretty little time, with honestly very little front end coding and front end skills. So that's kind of really the magic of what tile serve and feature serve can do if you kind of need to bootstrap a project with PostGIS on the web. This is the URL to the demo code I was just showing you. And I am just gonna wrap up with a couple notes for you. I have a Postgres meetup for anybody that's online. We just started in the last couple months, so if you want to learn more about Postgres stuff or see what I'm up to, come find us there. And I am in Kansas. If anybody is ever coming through town and wants to speak at a meetup or join us at a meetup, let me know. We would be happy to have you. Thank you so much. I will take some questions that hopefully Paul and Martin can answer.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Not a pleasure. Do you have any advice about putting authentication in front of PG tile serve?
I have not ever built like anything that far. Have you gone that far with it?
No. I've only ever known the answer in theory, which is to do what they've done, which is to use an auth proxy. Although there's at least one. I feel like Keycloak had an auth proxy that you didn't have to handball yourself. But but yeah, I've never done it myself, so I'm not the right person to give you the, the correct answer. I'd say you're on the right track though. You need an authentication proxy.
Yeah.
Okay, no more questions? I don't have any questions because I wrote the darn thing.
Are you, I kept asking, I think I said like 3 times, like, I don't know who wrote this demo code, but it's great. And was it you, Paul?
Yeah, it was the centerpiece of a blog post from a long time ago when I wanted to show off tile serve and feature serve and PG routing at the same time.
Anyways, it's great. And I think really like the whole talk for me is making that available to people because it is so fast to bootstrap any routing with feature serve, even though I think you probably wrote it for a blog post. Like it really works for any data anywhere. And I don't know if I told you this, but I've kind of been doing like a little PostGIS stump speech for, like random developer conferences and places where there's very little open source, like, and I did a talk locally in Lawrence, for just a tech audience, not even a database audience, like just a general tech audience. And I went through, how to get a map, how to get a shapefile, and then I showed like this piece at the end, right? And I can do like any city, right? I did like a map of my favorite barbecue restaurants in Kansas City. And like that's the best thing about this is like it's so accessible and you can just change it to whatever you want to like just kind of show off what PostGIS can do.
Yeah, it's great. All right. Thanks a lot, Liz.